So this was supposed to be a serious moment. 4 American service members had just been killed. The United States was now involved in the most significant military action of Donald Trump's entire second term. And reporters were ready. Questions about the casualties, questions about the strategy, questions about how long this conflict with Iran might last, questions about intelligence, questions about Pete Hegseth, questions about the Epstein files that had suddenly started surfacing again. The press corps had a list a mile long. And Donald Trump, the man who has never met a microphone he didn't love, walked up to the podium, opened his mouth, and started talking about drapes, gold drapes, ballrooms, construction noise, and how his wife doesn't like the sound of pile drivers. And then, just like that, he turned around and walked away, mid-question. Reporters shouting after him, no answers, just footsteps leaving the room. And once you actually watch the footage, it gets even stranger.
Members here with us too in this beautiful building, isn't it beautiful? We're adding on to the building a little bit. We're improving the building. See that nice drape? When that comes down right now, you see a very, very deep hole. But in about a year and a half from now, you're going to see a very, very beautiful building. And there's your entrance to it right there. In fact, it looks so nice, I think I'll save money on the doors, because it can't get more beautiful than that. I picked those drapes in my first term. I always like gold, but I think we can save a lot of money. I just saved curtains. But, and it'll be spectacular. It'll be the most beautiful ballroom. I believe it's because I built many a ballroom. I believe it's going to be the most beautiful ballroom anywhere in the world. And when you hear all that hammering out there, you know why the First Lady is not thrilled exactly. She said, will the pile drivers ever stop? You know, they go from 6 in the morning till 11:30 in the evening. Can you imagine? Here? You know what? To me, that's a beautiful sound. She doesn't like it. I love it. You know what? To me, other than here, because we're donating it, not a penny to the taxpayer. It'll be under budget, ahead of schedule. It'll be 400 million or less. Most people say 400 million or more. No, it'll be less. But when I hear that sound, that beautiful sound behind me, it means money, so I like it. But my wife isn't thrilled. She said, this is getting crazy. I said, don't worry about it. We'll be all finished up in a few months. But now for the reason that we're gathered this morning to recognize the unsurpassed courage of 3 really incredible American heroes, 1 living.
Okay, so let's pause there, because that moment is important. This is the President of the United States speaking publicly for the first time after a military strike that killed 4 American service members. And the first thing he talks about is the interior decorating of a ballroom. Gold curtains, construction timelines, budget estimates, and how beautiful the room is going to look. Not the casualties, not the strategy, not the consequences. A ballroom renovation. And look, if this were a random event, maybe you could shrug it off as an awkward moment. But the context makes it a lot harder to ignore, because reporters were standing right there, waiting to ask questions about a war. And the questions they had weren't small ones. They were the kinds of questions that normally define an entire presidency. Why did the United States strike Iran? What intelligence justified the strike? How long will this conflict last? Are more American troops going to be deployed? And most importantly, what is the actual plan? Because during his campaigns, Trump repeatedly promised something very specific. He said he would not drag the United States into long foreign conflicts. That was a central part of his message. But now suddenly the United States is in a major confrontation with Iran. And even inside Washington, there are still huge questions about why the strike happened in the first place.
You're listening to President Trump. They're speaking for the first time from the White House about the attack on Iran, the killing of the Ayatollah, and the death of 4 U.S. service members. I want to bring in ABC News Chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce for a little more on what we just heard from the president. Mary, the president said that this was necessary to, in his words, eliminate the grave threat posed to America by this terroristic regime, talking about the regime in Iran. And then he went on to say that the U.S. was very nearly under threat. Will that be enough to satisfy his critics in Congress who say this was not urgent, he did not need to do this without a congressional approval?
Well, Diane, the president certainly is for the first time really fleshing out a bit more what that imminent threat was that he has argued led him to change his mind and go ahead and strike Iran now. Because, of course, this morning and in the days leading up to this, we have heard from the president and other top officials this argument that, Iran had for decades been very hostile to the rest of the world. And now the president is explaining that imminent threat, arguing that Iran had missiles capable of reaching the U.S. and saying that the U.S. was very nearly under threat. But the U.S.'s own intelligence had concluded that it would take 9 years for Iran to have a missile capable of reaching the U.S. And sources have confirmed to ABC News this morning that administration officials briefed congressional staff over the weekend, saying that U.S. intelligence did not suggest Iran was preparing to launch a preemptive strike against the U.S. So there are still some very big questions here about what evidence the president had of this imminent threat. And going forward on how long this campaign is going to last, you heard the president there saying whatever it takes. Of course, this is the president who promised not to drag the U.S. into prolonged foreign conflict, Diane.
Now that right there is where things start to get complicated, because the administration's explanation for the strike has shifted several times. First, we were told Iran posed an immediate threat. Then intelligence officials suggested that threat might not have been nearly as urgent. Then other officials said the strike was necessary to prevent a future attack. And depending on which official you listen to, the timeline changes, the evidence changes, the reasoning changes. And when that happens during a military conflict, people start asking a lot more questions, which is exactly what the press corps tried to do. That moment right there is the one that really caught people's attention, because reporters are literally shouting questions at the president. Questions about the war, about casualties, about what happens next. And instead of answering, he just walks away. Now, presidents avoiding questions isn't exactly new, but doing it immediately after launching a military strike, that's a little harder to ignore, especially when the speech itself spent more time on construction projects than on the conflict itself. And then the speech took another strange turn, because Trump decided to start talking about the Medal of Honor, which is the highest military award in the United States. And instead of discussing the soldiers who actually earned it, he made a joke about trying to get one for himself.
And I also want to salute 6 former Medal of Honor recipients: William Swenson, Jim McLuhan, Walter Marm, Thomas Paine, Sammy Davis. That's an interesting guy. Where is Sammy Davis? We have a big story here, Sammy. You've heard that all your life, I'll bet, huh? And Edward Byers. Stand up, please. You all look good. We all look good. We remember the ceremonies. Oh, great. It's a great honor. There's no greater. I tried for myself. I've tried numerous times to get one by myself. I keep getting shut down. They say, you can't do it, sir. Bad protocol. Very bad. I would say the worst. But I'm only kidding. You don't have to say I'm only kidding. Otherwise, the press will come out with it, which they actually did once.
Now imagine the context of that moment. American troops had just been killed. The country was entering a potential conflict with Iran, and the president is joking about trying to award himself a Medal of Honor. Even some Republicans watching the speech looked uncomfortable, because moments like that create a very strange tone during a serious national event. And that tone becomes even more confusing when you add what happened behind the scenes. Because according to Congressman Jason Crow, an Army veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, Trump recorded a video discussing the seriousness of war, talking about the sacrifices troops would make, talking about the cost of conflict. And then afterward, he hosted a $1 million per plate dinner party at Mar-a-Lago. Now, Crow's point was simple. When you place those two moments side by side, the contrast is pretty striking. And the political consequences are already starting to show. Because a new CNN poll released right after the strikes shows something very interesting. A majority of Americans don't support the action.
Results of our brand new CNN exclusive poll on the U.S. military action in Iran shows that President Trump has an uphill climb here to convince the American people to come to his view on this war. He starts out underwater. 59% of Americans in this poll say they disapprove of the action the U.S. took over the weekend. Only 41% approve. Majority say that they think this will make Iran more of a threat to the United States than less of a threat to the United States. And nearly 6 in 10 say they don't believe Donald Trump has a clear plan for how to deal with Iran. As with many things in American politics, a party dictates a lot of the thinking. So 77% of Republicans approve of the U.S. action this weekend. And in fact, while there may be some loud critics inside the MAGA world who say this is not an America First strategy, in our poll, those Republicans who identify as MAGA, they are the most supportive of the president's approach here. I will say the American people would like to see Congress involved here. A clear majority say that Congress should be authorizing future military action as it relates to Iran, and only 27% of poll respondents say that enough was done diplomatically in advance of the attacks. Another warning sign for President Trump, only 12% of poll respondents say they would favor U.S. ground troops being sent to Iran.
Those numbers matter, because historically, military action often produces what political scientists call a rally around the flag effect, where public support for a president increases during a conflict. But in this case, Trump is starting out underwater. More Americans disapprove of the strike than support it, and nearly 6 out of 10 say they don't believe the president has a clear plan moving forward. That's not exactly the political momentum you want when entering a major international conflict. And there's another number in that poll that stands out even more. Only 12% of Americans say they would support sending ground troops into Iran. 12%, which means the American public has very little appetite for a prolonged war. And yet during the speech, Trump refused to rule out that possibility. So now the country is in a strange situation. A military conflict with unclear goals. A president who avoided questions, and a public that's deeply skeptical about the entire situation. And that brings us back to the moment we started with, the speech. Because when historians look back at moments like this, they often focus on the tone as much as the policy. The first public appearance after a major military strike, a moment when the country is looking for leadership, looking for clarity, looking for answers. And instead, they got a speech about ballroom drapes, gold curtains, construction noise, and then the president walked away. Reporters still shouting questions behind him. And right now, those questions are still unanswered. But something tells me this story is far from over. Because when a president launches a military strike and then refuses to explain it, eventually the questions catch up. And when they do, the cameras will be rolling.